Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter. I'd like to welcome to the podcast two very special guests and two people that have been instrumental in helping me to create the Pilgrim Woman. So I'd like to introduce Andrew and Joe from Pangolin Edition's digital team. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how you doing?
Well, thank you. Yourself?
Yep, it's all good here. So, bit of a slow recovery after the COVID, but we're on an upwards trend, so that's the main thing.
Well, that's good to hear. So I'll come to you first, Andrew, if that's okay. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your job within the digital team at Pangolin?
Yeah, sure. My background's in industrial design, and I joined the digital department only about 6 years ago. I initially wanted to do some research with the company because I could see how much digital technology was going to affect sculptors and the way they work. And started a conversation with Runway, which later came to fruition. I saw a post advertised and I joined, and the amount of effect that digital has had on the way we work has far exceeded any of my expectations. And I'm actually glad I didn't take on a research project because I'd have never kept up with the pace of change. It would have been an endless project.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Joe? What's your background?
I actually come from an illustration background. My degree was in illustration. I've always done that as my own hobby, and it's always been digitally based. So I spent some time in printing before I came to Pangolin, digital printing. And when I first joined here, it was to do something that was slightly more hands-on, and I ended up taking on the 3D printers when we first invested in them around sort of 8.5 years ago now. And from then, it's just been a learning curve from a very basic level of 3D interaction to sort of spearheading the software that we use now and some of the hardware that we pick up for Pangolin.
Right. So digital, as you said, it moves at such a pace, and you wouldn't necessarily put the lost wax technique and digital together. So Andrew, could you give listeners a flavour of some of the things that you've got within the digital suite so they can kind of imagine, what your side of the business looks like?
Being able to enlarge things, but before digital technology, everything was enlarged with calipers and steel armatures to get the extremities of sculptures. Very hands-on, very labour-intensive. So the ability to digitally capture with either a laser scanner or white light scanner, whatever method of capture, taking a real-world object and turning it into a digital object so that it could be machined at a different scale. That alone was a game changer, really, for the sculpture industry. But it's then spread to all parts of the foundry. I like to think we're the heart of the foundry, but I think sometimes we're a bit like an infection. We've got into every part of the foundry.
Right.
And initially, we were very nervous about touching any of the artists' work. We didn't want to. Our job was to replicate it exactly as they wanted it. But now that's changed, really. It gradually changed when we realised that if a team of sculptors have worked on a monumental piece for months on end, if we could have altered that at the digital stage, it's a huge saving.
Yeah.
And now we come to the stage where we can, with the larger pieces, we can actually put a client in a VR studio so they can see the piece at the scale they want to and make decisions before we begin anything. So it's just a much more cost-effective and assured route of getting to where you want to. It just gives extra confidence, right? And even most traditional of sculptors have started to embrace VR.
Right.
Some 80-year-old artists sitting in VR making adjustments to their works before they're made.
Well, that's an incredible image to try and conjure up, isn't it, really? Joe, if could you tell us the sort of nuts and bolts? What are the actual machines or tools or pieces of equipment that you have within the digital suites?
Yeah, sure. So in the early days, we started out with a laser scanner that was capable of scanning down to around 20 or 30 microns. And we also had a single powder printer. And from there, the powder printing is expanded out to around 6 or 7 powder machines, just purely on volume of the larger pieces that we do. And we've got some higher resolution 3D printers as well, which are predominantly plastic printers, which we use for the higher detail works. We've upgraded our laser scanners, so we have more accurate scanners now. As Andy said previously, we've got some white light scanners which can achieve color information, but we've also invested in photogrammetry as another form of scanning, because we started to realize that we could get somewhere between the white light scanning and the laser scanning by using that process, sort of a highly accurate representation of something which has highly accurate color detail with it as well. In terms of software, you know, we use some of the traditional CAD softwares such as Rhino, and then organic modeling softwares like ZBrush. They're kind of our go-tos for origination, and then we use some scanning softwares by 3D Systems that are to process a lot of our scan and prep our printers.
Right. Well, you mentioned the photogrammetry suite, and that was something that you introduced to me, or the idea of, quite early on. I remember coming to visit you armed with sketches and woven panels that I'd made, and some very early experiments that I'd completed with Nottingham University and their digital suite. And you explained about the photogrammetry, where a person or an object could go within this space and be surrounded by cameras. And that was something that we decided would be the best route for the Pilgrim Woman. So a few months ago, I arrived with my team. So I'd brought with me some of the ladies that had hand-stitched the dress, a filmmaker as well, and a lovely lady called Trish, who came to be sort of my assistant, because once I started being stitched in the dress, I couldn't move or get anything. And that process was that I would become the Pilgrim Woman and then stand in this rig. So what's the process? I use, for somebody who's never heard of photogrammetry, I use the analogy of like when you use your phone or camera to take a landscape shot, you're given a line to follow, and your camera takes lots of photographs, and then once you've finished moving your camera, it stitches them together to create your panoramic shot. But I likened photogrammetry to something similar, but within the 3D form. So is there a way you could describe what all of those cameras within the photogrammetry does to somebody who's never heard of photogrammetry at all?
Wow, we're both looking at each other, thinking about how we explain it easily. Really.
It's I think photogrammetry is a difficult term for most people, and it's not sort of self-explanatory. It sounds confusing before you even start. It's really like 3D photography, and you almost don't need to know what the computers are doing, and to some extent we don't know what the computers are doing because it's software based. The software understands when you feed it 160 images, I think it was in your case.
Yeah.
It can find comparisons within each photograph. It works out where it was in the room when it took the photograph, and its proximity to the other cameras when they took their photographs.
How far that subject is that it's trying to shoot from the camera itself. So you end up building surfaces from points that it's collecting and measuring, which becomes the volume in the middle, which in your case was you in the dress for the Pilgrim Woman. But I think what's really important with that process to sort of take away from it, it's a moment in time that you capture in a snap of a second, which in most processes with regards to 3D scanning is impossible, because somebody has to hold the position or when you're scanning with a laser, it takes time to do it, anywhere up to an hour to do something of a significant size. Whereas with photogrammetry, when you've got the rig of cameras, which is how we refer to it, set up, you can define how large you want to shoot within the volume in the middle. So we had it perfectly tuned to the size that you were and the size that you would be once you have the dress on. And what that means is you capture things like the weight of the dress at a particular point where you wouldn't be able to do that with laser scanning, because you would be having to fake how that would be sitting naturally.
Yeah.
It's not a brand new technology. It's been around for a while, and there are things like LiDAR scanners that will capture land topology and building sites and things like that. So it's been used in industry for a while, but I think it's become more accessible. The software has become easier to use. You can just do it with cameras, and even kids are going to museums now and shooting multiple objects, multiple photographs of a static object, and then uploading them to sites like Sketchfab or Scan the World. So museum artifacts are being captured all over the world and stored in places where other people can access that information. I think the difference with the photogrammetry rig is we've probably got it is certainly the only rig that I know of that's been designed specifically for sculpture.
And we can break the shoot up as well. So if we're shooting something that is outside of the volume that we define in the middle, or for whatever reason, if it's extension of arms or there's props that need to be within that pose as well, we divide that out. We can manipulate the rig so that we can shoot one half of whatever that object is and then shoot the other without moving anything significantly, and get a very accurate large model out of it as well, which in the film and game industry, for example, they're not interested in that. They want something very simple when they shoot it.
Yeah, it was quite an amazing thing to experience, being dressed and standing in the rig. And I think it took, we was laughing about it afterwards when it was all over, that it took 2 hours to get dressed and to be stitched into the dress, and once I held my pose, it was like flash, that was it, all done, right, you can get out now. it was so quick. But I suppose, like you're describing, that's the beauty of photogrammetry, that it will capture perfectly that moment in time, and it really has captured the movements of the fabric, the positioning so well, and it does look so naturalistic. But there was a little snag along the way, wasn't there? I think it was a week before we was due to arrive, I'd sent a sort of a dress rehearsal picture, and you said, the camera's not going to see white fabric, and some of the Pilgrim Woman's outfit was white. So I had to dash off to the haberdashers and try and find some dye. So we ended up dyeing the shift and the bonnet bright blue so that the cameras would be able to see it. So is that because the photogrammetry rig is within a white room? Is that why it wouldn't see the white cloth?
Not necessarily. So without getting too complicated about it, the information that relies on to build the object you see, it is in a sort of grayscale balance of building heights for the object. So if you imagine a value of white being the highest and black being the lowest, if you give it an object that's entirely white, even though you're going to cast shadows on there, it's quite hard for the photogrammetry to then build those surfaces. Now, there's ways around that, but to make it a more simple method when we're shooting, that's kind of why we ended up advising to do a color, because there's more of a flat tone there for it to pick up and decide what's a high and low against, like you say, we've got a stark white background in ours. But that was the reasoning behind that.
It's really to get the best result. We can work with whites and blacks. I think we've just done an outfit that's completely black, but you get less understanding from the computers of what it's looking at, and so therefore there's more cleaning up time. And the more we have to work on it, the more danger there is of deviating from what you wanted to capture in the moment.
Yeah.
So by pre-preparing and dyeing everything, we minimised the amount of work we had to do on that enormously. And you know, we know we were absolutely faithful to that 2 hours of arranging clothing.
Yes.
It came out exactly as you had wanted it.
I think just picking up on what Andy said there, sorry to interrupt what you were just about to say, but the 2 hours of arranging the clothing, I mean, the way to really imagine that or think about that for anybody listening to this is, if you imagine a sculptor with their clay deciding how something would flow or how something would look to the viewer, that's essentially what we're doing in that 2 hour period, because whatever's decided at that point becomes the sculpture once we've done the photogrammetry shoot. Although that's only a second in time, the 2 hours preparation is what makes that sculpture convincing. And that's what Andy means about the rig being designed specifically for sculpture. Obviously, the cameras and the way they're set up are for that, but our mindset and how we're looking to produce these objects are with sculpture in mind from the start to finish.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense. And, you know, even though I was the model for the dress, lots of photographs was taken throughout so that I could direct my team and say, oh, well, could we move that piece of fabric here, and this, could we have it more flowing? And I wanted to get that feel like she was stood outside and there was wind sort of blowing through her skirt, so you get that fluid movement. And I think that the photogrammetry captured that absolutely perfect.
I think this is a great place to take a little pause from photogrammetry, and we're going to hear again from Highcliffe Music. This time it's another letter in which Mary Brewster reflects on the circumstances which led to the signing of the momentous Mayflower Compact, which formed the basis of the American Constitution and their democratic way of life.
The Mayflower, 11th of November, 1620. 67 days at sea. My dearest Patience, we are still lying at anchor off Cape Cod, and are on very short rations indeed. Dorothy Bradford and Elizabeth Hopkins are ensuring that the children are adequately fed, whilst Priscilla Mullins is helping me to share what is left amongst the adults. The shortages are leading to impatience now that we are so close to land. I fear that although the younger men are most eager to disembark and begin their new lives of freedom, this is yet a distant hope. The dark nights, the poor weather, and the unknown terrain all make hasty actions too risky. Fortunately, as you know, your father is a man of letters and high learning, and as elder has some keen influence over the others. He and the other leaders have agreed that no progress can be made with the settlement until all on the Mayflower have signed the Mayflower Compact. This is a great document setting down the principles under which our new community will be founded. All the men have now signed, indicating their commitment to establishing a civil government and to abide fairly by its laws. I think your father's experience of government and affairs of state from working for the Queen all those years ago have made him very wise in these matters. Of course, he also has the loyal support of William Bradford, who has great influence with the younger adventurers. There is urgent need to plan and organise. Captain Jones is keen to return the Mayflower to England, and therefore wishes us to disembark, but this is not yet possible. Many pilgrims are sick and require shelter and safety. The small boat we brought with us is much damaged by her storage below deck. She was greatly rattled by the storms and will now take some time to repair. I fear it may be many days before anyone can venture ashore, and many months before we are able to complete the building of our new homes. The weather is cold and bleak on this short November day, and the wind howls, foretelling a harsh winter. With the delayed departure and the repairs and other setbacks, we really have arrived at the wrong end of the year. But, oh dearest Patience, I am confident that we will have the makings of a successful settlement. God has graced us with a safe arrival. We have among our number masters of all necessary trades, with the skill and wit to complete our new homes so that you can come and join us before too long. We have the faith that God is on our side and is with us in our endeavours to establish a new community based on freedom of worship, injustice and peace. We know that the people living here on Cape Cod are very different from us. Some of our number are fearful of this, but I welcome it as we are all God's children. People back in England certainly did not treat us well when we were forced to put ashore. They thought us all criminals because of our different costume and ways. I hope and pray that we may be more welcomed by the people we meet here in the New World, and that in the fullness of time we can work together in peace and harmony to build a thriving nation. Yes, this place we will call New England is truly the place we're all meant to be. With very much love to all. Mother. P.S. Whilst I'm desperately eager to see you, please do not set out to join us until spring, when you may hope to have a calmer voyage than mine. Trust in the Lord.
That was Ella Pritchard of Highcliffe Music. Now back to my special guests, where I'm talking with Andrew Flint and Joe Carpenter from Pangolin Edition's Digital Suite. So there was another process that we used. The Pilgrim Woman is holding a very special apple in her hand, and that's going to be talked about a little bit more in a future podcast episode where we discuss the Pilgrim 400 apple. But when we were doing the initial images in the photogrammetry rig, we took a couple of shots with me holding the apple, a couple of shots without the apple, and then the apple was taken away and a different technique was used to capture that. Andrew, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
As well as capturing additional detail with the laser scanner, it also enables us to deconstruct the subject a bit. Even though you've got 160 cameras in the rig, it's a line of sight process, and there's always going to be parts that none of the cameras are able to get to. So by taking the apple out of the hand, it means we can capture the hand perfectly on the inside, capture the apple as a whole with the laser scanner, and then put those objects back together so that there's no missing information.
I see. So we can then capture the whole of the apple, so that when you view the sculpture, you know, you could even run your hands around it and all the detail will be there completely. So laser scanning was something that was used for another part of the project. So I'm creating two Pilgrim Women statues, and one of the Pilgrim Woman is going to be decorated with lots of intricate weaves that was created by both myself and members of the community. And so over a period of 4 weeks, the 50 Women project took place, and they all learnt how to do macrame, and I asked them to donate a panel. And so we received around 42 panels, which I then brought down to show you both. But when you take 42 women and get them to weave even the same pattern, they're all going to be slightly different. And so we made the decision that we would just make a set height, and then the pieces could be shrunk from corner to corner to fit that size, but the widths would be as they were. But you had to do a few other processes, didn't you, to be able to get that little piece of macrame to sit still?
Yeah, it was it was a bit of a modelling challenge, because we're dealing with quite high resolution data per panel, and so I mean, when I say high resolution, probably in the region of 2 or 3 million triangles that make up each object. So we then had to fit that to the curvature of the dress, and where the puckering of the dress and any of the folds were quite prominent, and you were trying to fit that around, it involves a lot of sort of pulling and rotating and then modeling that surface back in. Quite a bit of time spent getting that right, but I think where it's got to now, it actually looks pretty seamless, like it was, like it was designed to be part of that from the start. I think if we'd have shot that with photogrammetry, we'd have probably got somewhere close if they were all attached in the first place. But I don't think it would have been quite as clear as we've ended up with this one. We had a lot of control of undercuts and everything else, which is really important for the casting process.
Yes.
Yeah, even with the laser, it's a line of sight method of capturing, but with the laser you can go in at 360 degrees around each part of the weave. Therefore, we just captured that bit more information, and I think that really shows in the cast parts that are coming through now. It looks almost like we cast directly from the weavings themselves.
Yeah, and it does look amazing. I've been kept up to date with the progress, and the weaves just look absolutely crisp and clear, and every knot and movement is so visible. And you even sent me a little bit of my own torso in 3D printed form, didn't you? So I could see the textures.
Yeah. That's the beauty of the process, is that you can kind of take a snippet at any point by doing a 3D print of what you've got to enable an artist to see what they're going to get in the metal stage, which is
we're
fantastic.
Also wary of just signing things off on screens. Everybody's monitor's different, and it's very easy to misunderstand scale because you can zoom into something or view it from too far away and not see what you've got. So the ability to just be able to 3D print something overnight to send to the artist that we're working with is a really good way of just keeping sure that we're on track with the artist's aims.
Right, so have you done many full-size 3D prints like this before?
No, it tends to be for artworks that are originated digitally, because you haven't got a 3D thing to take a mold off. So there's an immediate, you don't have to scan it, you've already got the digital information, so you can go straight to the printing process. It's also a decision we make because of editions. If you're going to make 10 of something, then it's more cost effective. As soon as you make a second one, it's more cost effective to make the model and take molds off and then waxes. But it is unusual to cast such a large item from 3D prints.
Wow, so I really did push you with this project.
You did, absolutely. And we do face that quite often. Using new technology for the scale of projects that we're dealing with is quite a high risk thing, and the burden is on us, not on the artist. Particularly in the case of your piece, the castings come out great.
Yeah, as Andy said, that process is designed to be used in a casting environment, and so the reason we chose that was because we knew that it should be a hard and fast proven method that we were going to get good castings off, and so far we've been right. We have used it in the past for other projects, but just not to that scale, so we're aware of what the results could be. But this was sort of significant in the detail that was being retained, and that's why we wanted to do it.
Yeah, if with any 3D printing, there can be sort of linear artifacts as it builds. Most of them are a sort of linear process, where you had to make sure that all the orientation of the parts was good, so that we get so that we don't get any evidence of the 3D printing. Some artists are quite happy to include the process in the final thing, but for you, it was important that we were creating a sculpture that was about your sculpture, not the way it was made.
Yeah, and the texture of the textile is so very clear to see, isn't it?
I think I think anybody would guess that that's the process that had happened to it at all, and that's the whole reason we did it.
Do you know, it's funny you say that, because I think now that I've started on this digital route, I've seen a few other sculptures out there that have been made with digital and 3D printing, and particularly when textiles are involved, you can sort of tell that it was formed on a computer and not from a real life piece of textile, because the movements aren't they haven't got the movements of that textile just right. It looks almost not real. But with the photogrammetry capturing real life textile, that's so visible in the bronze that you don't even question it. And that's the beauty of this process that we've used, that you see the bronze and you don't question that is textile, even though it's a hard metal, but you see it as textile because the movement has been captured absolutely perfectly and true to how textiles would move. So I think that's a very important part of the process.
I think that's absolutely where we are with the 3D printing in the Foundry as well. Initially, when 3D printing became available to artists, they were interested in the sort of failings of the process and the structures that the 3D printers created. We only use those processes now if they're not evident in the final thing. We don't want people to look back on a piece and think, oh yeah, that's inferior because it was a 3D printing of that time. To us, it must look as good as any lost wax piece we would do.
Yeah, and the results that I've seen so far, when I compare them to the other lost wax pieces that I've cast with you over the years, there really isn't any comparison. You cannot tell that one's not been made by hand weaving wax and one's been made by 3D printing a polymer that behaves like a wax. So it really is a great process.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I think it was very fortuitous that you came to us when we were researching the photogrammetry route. It's a fairly new resource for us at the Foundry. We're making great use of it, and it's really lovely to have such a good project of yours come through and utilise that process. Is exactly the sort of thing we're looking for.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for being on the podcast, and it's been fascinating as always chatting with the two of you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I always love the chance to have a creative chat with the team at Pangolin. And apologies if there was any crackles or noises. We really did struggle with our internet connection with our chat. Well, the next episode of the podcast will be taking a very different direction. Do join me when my special guest will be Susan Nockels. She's a Congregational Church minister, and we're going to talk about the pilgrims who stayed behind. Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials